Last episode, the house began to collapse from the inside. Castro grew watchful, suspicious of everything, certain of nothing, the particular unraveling of a proud man who has lost control of a situation he never understood he was in. Agatha grew brittle, searching, investigating, assembling pieces of a picture that kept shifting every time she thought she had it. Vivian offered her tea. She caught Agatha searching her private chambers, a violation that would have broken most women, that would have produced confrontation or tears or the kind of dramatic scene that gives the other person something to manage. And she offered her tea, warm, gracious, completely impenetrable. Agatha left more frightened than she had arrived. Then the financial pressure began to bite. Castro's investments moved in uncomfortable directions. His business associates' communications with Agatha surfaced at precisely the wrong moment. The fractures between them deepened into something that could no longer be smoothed over with proximity and charm. And then, the invitation. The Queen's winter ball. One cream envelope. One royal seal. One woman chosen above all others in London society. Vivian Ashcombe. Agatha stood in the corridor with her assembled evidence and her careful case, and understood, in a single cold moment, that she had been outmaneuvered at a level she had not known existed. You cannot expose the woman the Queen has chosen. You cannot touch what society has decided is untouchable. This is episode 4, the finale, the coldest revenge. Let us see how it ends. January ended. If February arrived with the particular quality of a London winter that has decided to be serious about itself, grey, cold, pressing against the windows of Ashcombe House with the patient insistence of something that intends to be felt. The streets were quieter than usual. The social calendar, which never fully paused, had contracted into the more intimate gatherings of a season waiting for the Queen's winter ball to mark its proper beginning. Vivian used the quiet. She had spent 4 months building. The financial pressure, the social erosion, the seeds of suspicion planted between Castro and Agatha that had taken root and grown into something neither of them could now easily remove. Each piece had been placed with care. Each timing had been calculated. Each move had been designed not to be traced, not to be attributed, not to allow any reasonable person looking at the situation from the outside to point to Vivian Ashcombe and say, she did this. She had done all of it. And now she was executing the final stage. The financial picture had worsened considerably. Castro's quarterly review had arrived 3 days ago, and she had observed its reception from the particular position of a woman who manages a household's correspondence and can therefore track the arrival of documents she does not open and gauge their content from the behaviour of the person who receives them. He had been in his study for 4 hours after opening the solicitor's report. He had emerged with the expression of a man who has received numbers that do not correspond to his expectations and who is conducting an internal audit of how this has happened and whose fault it is. The audit, she knew, was pointing in Agatha's direction. Not because Agatha was guilty of the investment problems. She was not. But because the timing of Castro's discovery of Agatha's communication with the business associate had lodged itself in his mind at precisely the moment the losses were being calculated. And proud men under financial pressure rarely apply their analytical faculties with complete objectivity. He needed someone to blame. Agatha was available? Vivian had ensured this availability with the precision of a woman who understood that the most effective manipulation required no ongoing management, only the correct initial placement. After that, the targets managed the situation themselves. The social architecture required its final pieces. She spent 3 days in the week before the ball executing what she thought of as the completion work, the final calibrations of a plan that had been months in the making. She visited Lady Beatrice Holloway for morning tea. Lady Beatrice was exactly what she had always been. The social mainspring of London's elite gossip circuit, a woman whose conversation was 90% information redistribution, and whose reach across the relevant circles was comprehensive and reliable. Vivian had been using her as an unwitting instrument for months. Lady Beatrice had no idea. She believed, entirely genuinely, that her conversations with Lady Ashcombe were the natural exchange between two well-connected women of similar social standing. They were. They were also considerably more useful than Lady Beatrice understood. Over tea, Vivian mentioned, casually, in the context of a broader conversation about the season's social developments, that she had heard concerning things about the provenance of certain jewellery that had recently appeared on a woman in their circle. She did not name Agatha. She did not need to. Lady Beatrice's social mapping was precise enough that a sufficient number of contextual details, assembled without a name, produced the name automatically in the listener's mind. She also mentioned, in the context of discussing parliamentary matters, which Lady Beatrice followed with the genuine interest of a woman whose husband sat in the Lords, that Lord Castro's northern campaign had encountered some significant administrative difficulties. Administrative said, with the particular delicacy that in their social register meant, something has gone wrong in the management, and the management is not the professional kind. Lady Beatrice received both pieces of information with the barely suppressed alertness of a woman who has just been handed two excellent items and is already calculating their distribution. Vivian departed after an hour, thanked her hostess warmly, and left Lady Beatrice to her work. The letters she sent in the final week were the most precise of the entire sequence. Not to Agatha, not to Castro. She had moved past direct interventions between them. The fractures were self-sustaining now, requiring no additional engineering. These letters went to three specific individuals whose positions in the social and political landscape would determine how the events of the winter ball were received and interpreted. Lord Ashwick, Castro's most significant political ally, whose support for the Northern campaign was the cornerstone of Castro's parliamentary ambitions. A private note from Vivian, handwritten and personal, mentioning with apparent guilelessness that she hoped the recent administrative complications would not affect Lord Ashwick's confidence in her husband's organisational reliability. The note was concerned and loyal in tone. It was also the precise communication of a woman ensuring that the right person was primed to hear the right information at the right moment. The Duchess of Wentworth, a brief, gracious acknowledgement of the ball invitation, with the kind of detailed appreciation that signalled Vivian's understanding of and gratitude for the Duchess's social judgment, establishing, cementing, the connection between them in the week before the event where that connection would be most visible. And Abigail. To Abigail she wrote plainly, the only plain letter she wrote to anyone. It is time. Be at the ball. Position yourself near Lady Holloway in the second hour. When things begin, do not intervene. Simply observe and afterward be available to confirm what was witnessed to anyone who asks. You will know when things begin. Everyone will. Abigail's response arrived the following morning. I will be there. I have been there in every way that matters since the morning room when you said, hand him the match. God help them both. And well done, Vivian. Well done. Vivian folded the letter and placed it with Mr. Fenwick. She was ready. The Queen's Winter Ball was held at Grosvenor House, which had been taken for the occasion by the Duchess of Wentworth's committee, and dressed for it with the thoroughness of people who understood that the event's significance required its setting to match. The entrance hall was candle-lit. Hundreds of candles, the light warm and deliberately flattering, the kind of illumination that made everyone present appear at their most composed and made the event feel, even before it began, like something that would be remembered. The ballroom itself was extraordinary, white and gold, with the proportions of a room designed to make human beings feel simultaneously grand and appropriately small. The orchestra was already playing when guests began to arrive. Handel, so stately and perfect for the occasion, filling the upper registers of the space and drifting down through the candlelight like something material. Society arrived in its best, the women in silks and satins, the men in their formal black, the decorations and orders of those who possessed them worn with varying degrees of comfort. The Duchess of Wentworth received her guests with the authority of a woman in her own element, which this was, had been, for 40 years. Agatha arrived with Castro. This was itself already a statement, one that the assembled company registered and processed with the collective speed of a social organism that had been anticipating and discussing this particular configuration for months. Lord Castro Ashcombe, attending the Queen's winter ball with his wife's absence, made visible by the presence of a woman who was not his wife, whose position in his household had been the subject of considerable speculation, whose social standing had been declining with the steady inevitability of a ship taking on water. She wore ivory, not white. White was reserved for debutantes and weddings. Ivory was its sophisticated cousin, chosen with the obvious intention of appearing bridal-adjacent without the technical violation. It was either a bold choice or a miscalculation, depending on who was observing, and the who was observing this evening were the most socially consequential people in London. Castro appeared beside her with the composed expression of a man performing confidence he no longer felt entirely. They were announced. The room received them. Not with hostility. English society was too refined for overt hostility. With the particular quality of reception that communicated awareness without expression, that registered a situation and noted it, and moved on with the smooth efficiency of people who would discuss it thoroughly later. Vivian arrived 40 minutes after the ball's opening. This was calculated. She had thought carefully about timing. Too early, and she would simply be present. The correct lateness was the kind that allowed a room to fill, to establish its social geography, to settle into its patterns, and then to be interrupted by an arrival that reorganized those patterns. She wore silver, not the silver of cold or of metal, but the silver of winter moonlight, a silk that caught the candlelight and held it, that moved with her and shifted between silver and the faintest possible grey, depending on the angle of the light. That was the most beautiful thing she had worn since the early years of her marriage. She had chosen it because it was right. She had also chosen it because she understood that appearance at an event of this caliber was itself a communication, and that a woman dressed in silver at a winter ball was making a very specific statement about her relationship to the room. She was not attending the winter ball. She was of it. The difference was apparent the moment she entered. The Duchess of Wentworth moved through the room to meet her. An almost unprecedented gesture, the hostess coming to the guest rather than receiving at the entrance. This was noted. This was noted by every person in the room who understood what it meant, at which was everyone. "Lady Ashcombe," the Duchess said, with the warmth of a woman greeting someone she has specifically chosen to honour. "How magnificent you look. Come. I want to introduce you to several people who have been looking forward to meeting you." Vivian smiled. "You are too kind, Your Grace." She did not look at Castro. She did not look at Agatha. She allowed herself to be led into the centre of the room by the most powerful social matron in London, and she greeted the people to whom she was introduced with the composed, genuine warmth of a woman entirely at home in her circumstances. She allowed herself to feel it for exactly a moment, magnificent. She felt them watching. Castro, She located him in her peripheral awareness without directing her attention there, to the unconscious tracking of a woman who had spent months being very aware of his position in every room. He was watching her with the expression she had first seen in the Cavendish ballroom, amplified now by the context and the silver dress and the Duchess's unprecedented greeting and the cumulative weight of months of re-seeing. He looked at her the way men look at something they have lost and are only now understanding the value of. Too late, she thought. Not with satisfaction, or not only with satisfaction. With the particular sadness of someone who had once loved the person they are watching and finds the remnant of that love not in warmth, but in a kind of grief for what might have been, in a different world, between different people, if things had gone differently. She had loved him once. She had loved him genuinely, so with the whole of herself, for longer than he deserved. That love was not entirely gone. It had changed, transformed into something she did not have a precise name for. Not hatred. Hatred required ongoing heat, and she was past heat, something colder and more final. The place on the other side of love when love has been comprehensively betrayed, and the betrayed person has had sufficient time and sufficient clarity to understand exactly what was done to them. She felt it for exactly the time it deserved. Then she accepted a glass of champagne from a passing footman and turned her full attention to the conversation she was having with Lord Pemberton, who was saying something interesting about the new parliamentary session. Agatha was watching too. Vivian was aware of this from across the room, the specific quality of Agatha's attention, which was different from Castro's. Where Castro's watching was grief-adjacent, Agatha's was the watching of a woman calculating and finding her calculations increasingly inadequate. She had come to this ball with what she had believed were advantages: Castro's presence, her own appearance, the assumption that the social terrain, while not entirely favourable, was navigable. She had arrived to find Vivian in silver, being led through the room by the Duchess of Wentworth, greeted with the particular warmth of the socially elevated receiving one of their own. And she had understood. Vivian saw the understanding arrive in Agatha's face from across the ballroom, that she had miscalculated the terrain entirely. The room was not navigable for her. The room belonged to Vivian. It had always belonged to Vivian. Agatha had simply not been able to see it because she had been looking at Castro and calculating her position relative to him, when she should have been looking at his wife and calculating her position relative to something considerably more formidable. It began, as these things often do, with a small thing. Lady Beatrice Holloway, positioned, as Vivian had arranged, in the second reception room where the conversation was more intimate and the acoustics carried further than the speaker typically intended, was in conversation with 3 women of significant social standing when Agatha passed within earshot. Lady Beatrice was not speaking of Agatha specifically. She was speaking of certain situations in certain households, with the elaborately general language of a woman making certain her audience understood precisely who she meant, while maintaining deniability. The jewellery, of course, is the clearest indication. A woman of uncertain background wearing pieces of that quality, attached to a household in that manner, one does wonder what the precise arrangement is. And the financial, but we shouldn't speak of it so openly. Only one does hear things. One can't help but hear. The women around Lady Beatrice heard. Agatha, passing, heard enough. She stopped. Just briefly. A pause of perhaps 2 seconds. The pause of a person who has registered something and is deciding whether to continue or respond. 2 seconds was long enough for the pause itself to be observed by the women in the conversation, who marked it with the social precision of people whose primary skill is exactly this kind of observation. She continued walking. But the pause had been seen. And in a room where everyone was observing everything, A pause of 2 seconds was sufficient. Castro found her in the third reception room 20 minutes later. Vivian did not see this directly. She heard it, or rather, she heard its aftermath, because what happened between Castro and Agatha in the third reception room was not quiet enough for the room's geography, and two couples who were present heard enough to understand the character of the exchange. It was not a full confrontation. It was not the dramatic scene of theatrical productions. It was something more damaging than drama. It was the cold, clipped exchange of two people whose mutual pretenses have become unsustainable and who are, in the pressure of a public setting, unable to maintain them while also being unable to fully abandon them. She heard, through Abigail, who was positioned as instructed and heard it directly, Castro's voice at a low, controlled intensity, saying something about the business associate and information that should not have travelled. She heard Agatha's voice, slightly higher than usual, with the quality of a woman defending herself against an accusation she had not been fully prepared for in this particular setting, saying something about unfair and, "You know I had nothing to do with." She heard Castro's voice again, lower. The controlled anger of a proud man who has been losing ground for months and is finally finding a surface for his frustration. And then a silence. And then Agatha's voice. Different from the defensive one, from the polished one, from any of the versions Vivian had observed across 4 months of careful observation. Raw. With the rawness of a woman who has held a great deal together for a great deal of time and has found the precise moment and the precise pressure that undoes the holding. "You told me I would not be hiding forever. You promised me. Lower your voice." "I will not lower my voice. You have spent 4 months. Agatha." "Don't." The word carried. Into the third reception room, into the doorway, into the awareness of the two couples who were present and who, in the following days, would recall what they had heard with the detailed accuracy of people who understood they had witnessed something significant. What followed happened with the momentum of things that have been building for a long time and have found their moment to break surface. Agatha left the third reception room and entered the main ballroom with the expression of a woman who has made a decision. Not a calculated decision, not the decision of a strategist, but the decision of a person whose calculation has broken down and who has been left with nothing but the unmanaged truth. She was going to say something. Vivian saw it from across the room, saw it in the quality of Agatha's movement, in the set of her face, in the specific type of desperation that produces the actions people regret most thoroughly in the morning. She did not intervene. She watched. Agatha approached Lord Ashwick. Of all the people in the room to approach, Lord Ashwick was the most catastrophic choice, which made it, from Vivian's perspective, the most productive one. He was Castro's most important political ally. He was also a man of rigid social propriety, whose patience for scenes of any variety was famously non-existent. What Agatha said to him, Vivian did not hear directly. She heard the effect of it. Lord Ashwick's expression moved through 3 registers in approximately 4 seconds. Surprise, distaste, and the specific settled quality of a man who has received information that has confirmed a suspicion he had been managing as unconfirmed. He excused himself from Agatha with the brief, final courtesy of a man removing himself from a situation he considers beneath him. When he located Castro across the room, he did not approach Castro. He simply looked at him. The look of a political ally communicating without words that an important conversation would be required. Not at this event, but soon. Castro saw the look. He understood the look. The colour of his face changed very slightly. Agatha, having committed to the action, found herself committed to its consequences. The specific trap of the person who has begun something in public that cannot be ended quietly. She moved through the room with the gathering desperation of a woman trying to regain control of a situation that has outpaced her, trying to correct the impression created by her approach to Ashwick with subsequent interactions that would reframe it. But the room had already formed its interpretation. And the room, once it has formed an interpretation, requires considerably more than redirection to revise it. Lady Beatrice Holloway was talking to 4 people. 3 women near the orchestra had paused their conversation. The Duchess of Wentworth, from her position of social altitude, was observing the room with the expression of a woman cataloguing what she was seeing for future reference. Agatha moved through it all, still beautiful, still composed on the surface, but the surface was showing, and the room watched with the collective, unblinking attention of an audience that has been waiting for a third act. Castro found her near the entrance. Vivian observed this from a position of perfect social legitimacy. She was in conversation with 2 members of the Duchess's committee, which placed her in a location that offered a clear sightline to the entrance hall without any appearance of surveillance. What passed between Castro and Agatha at the entrance to the Grosvenor House ballroom was brief. She could not hear it. She did not need to. She read it in their bodies, in Castro's controlled fury, in Agatha's fractured composure, in the specific geometry of 2 people who are ending something in public while trying to appear to be doing nothing of the kind. Agatha left. Not dramatically. She was not without control, even now. She retrieved her wrap from the cloakroom. She requested her carriage. She departed with the maintained posture of a woman leaving an event rather than fleeing it. But she left, and her departure was observed, and its meaning was understood. Castro stood at the entrance for a moment after her carriage had gone. Vivian watched him stand there, proud, isolated, in the ballroom of the year's most significant social event, surrounded by people who had just watched the architecture of a deception collapse in real time. Then he turned. His eyes found her across the room. She met his gaze for exactly the length of time required to communicate that she had seen everything, understood everything, and felt nothing in particular about any of it. Then she returned to her conversation. He came to her at midnight. The ball was winding toward its conclusion. The orchestra had moved to the quieter, slower pieces that signaled the evening's end, and the room had thinned as guests made their departures, with the gradual drift of a social event that had given everything it had to give. Vivian was in conversation near the window. Lord Edmund on her left, Abigail on her right, the specific warmth of people who have known each other long enough that conversation is easy. Edmund was saying something that made Abigail laugh. Vivian was in the middle of a response when she became aware of Castro at the edge of her peripheral vision. She finished her sentence. She excused herself from Edmund and Abigail with the composed grace of a woman managing her social obligations. "I believe my husband wishes a word. Will you excuse me for a moment?" And she moved to meet him. They stood in the window alcove. The room continued around them, not noticing or appearing not to notice, though both of them understood that they were visible, and that what happened here would be observed and interpreted. Castro looked at her. She had seen this expression once before, long ago, in the first year of their marriage. In a moment of crisis she barely remembered now, when he had come to her with the specific quality of a man who needs something from another person and is not accustomed to needing. He looked reduced. Not physically. Physically he was unchanged, as handsome and well-dressed as he had always been. But there was a quality of diminishment in his face that she had never seen there before, the quality of a man whose pride has suffered something more than a wound, something more structural. "Vivian?" he said. "Castro." A pause. He looked at the window, then back at her. The preparation for speech happening visibly, the intake of breath, the slight setting of the jaw, the surrender of a proud man to words he has not wanted to find himself saying. I have behaved. He stopped, started again. What I have done. To you. To our marriage. I need you to know that I— Please don't, she said quietly. He stopped. Not because I don't believe you, she continued, but because what you are about to say deserves more than a ballroom. And I deserve more than the version of this that is partly for our audience. He flinched. She had named the thing he had not quite admitted to himself, that some portion of this approach, this moment, was being performed for the room as much as directed at her. You're right, he said. You're right. I know. A silence. Is there— He searched her face for something. She gave him nothing. Not coldness, not warmth. The specific neutral composure of a woman who has finished performing her feelings for other people's benefit. Is there anything that could be— Is there any possibility— I don't know yet, she said. Which was true. She had decided what she was leaving. She had not decided everything about what came next. But I know that this is not the moment for that conversation. When? Not tonight. He nodded. The nod of a man accepting terms he is not in a position to negotiate. She looked at him for a moment. This man she had married, this man who had been careless with the most careful love she had ever given anyone, this man who was standing in the window of a ballroom looking at her with the expression of someone who has just understood, far too late, the value of what he had. She felt something. She would not pretend she felt nothing. But feeling something was not the same as allowing it to change the conclusions she had already drawn. Go home. Ay, Castro, she said gently. We will speak when there is something worth saying. She returned to Edmund and Abigail. Behind her, she heard Castro's footsteps move toward the exit. She did not turn. She found him waiting in the entrance hall of Ashcombe House at 2 a.m. She had returned after midnight, later than him, which had been deliberate. He was sitting in the chair by the fire in the entrance hall with the defeated posture of a man who has run out of performances. She set down her wrap. She removed her gloves with the unhurried precision of a woman in her own home. She turned to face him. Vivian. His voice was different from the ballroom version, stripped of the awareness of audience, which left it rawer, more genuinely his. I know what I have done. I know what I have cost us. I know that I have no right to ask you for anything, but I am asking. She looked at him. I am asking you to let me try to repair what I know I can't undo it. I know that. But if there is if you could find it in yourself to— Hector. The use of his given name stopped him. She had not used it since before Agatha. He registered this. She saw him register it. You mistook my silence for innocence, she said. She said it quietly, without drama, without the emphasis of someone delivering a prepared line. She said it the way you say a true thing, simply because it is true, and it needs to be said. And this is the moment for it. He stared at her. Everything you watched me do, she continued. Every dinner I managed, every gathering I organized. Every morning I sat at that table and said good morning, and every evening I sat at the other end of it and watched you. You saw none of it. You saw a woman being quiet. You saw obedience. You saw acceptance. She paused. It was never acceptance. It was observation. I was learning you for 6 years, and you never once thought to learn me. Vivian. I am not angry, she said, and this was the truth that surprised him most. She could see it. I moved past anger months ago. What I am is finished. With this version of things. With being the woman you decided I was because it was convenient for your other plans. What does that mean? It means I am leaving London, she said. Not tonight, not in a scene, but soon. I am taking the trust income that has always been mine, and I am going to my cousin's estate in the country, and I am going to live there for some time and decide what I want. And us. There is no arrangement to discuss tonight, she said firmly. You will hear from my solicitor about the practical matters. Everything else. She paused. Everything else requires more honesty than either of us has managed in a very long time. And I need to be somewhere quiet to find out whether I still have it. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something in his face that she had not seen there before. Not the performing, not the pride, not the calculation. Just the man. The man she had married, who had been careless and who was now, too late, understanding the cost of carelessness. I am sorry, he said, and it was genuine. She could tell the difference. I am genuinely, comprehensively sorry. She looked at him. I know, she said. She picked up her wrap. She walked up the stairs. She did not look back. She was packed within 3 days. Not the theatrical packing of a dramatic departure, not trunks in corridors and tearful farewells and the performance of a household in crisis. She was methodical, precise. She took what was hers and arranged for the rest to be managed through Mrs. Hartley, who received her instructions with the dignity of a woman who had always known this day was a possibility and had long since decided where her loyalty resided. The staff said their goodbyes with the particular warmth of people who do not entirely understand what has happened, but understand completely whose side they are on. Cook pressed her hand without speaking. Thomas met her at the carriage with his hat removed. Mrs. Hartley, at the door, Ox said. It has been the greatest privilege, my lady. The house will not be the same. The house will be perfectly fine, Vivian said. Houses survive their inhabitants. It is the inhabitants who require the care. She got into the carriage. Edmund was at the end of the street. This had not been arranged, or not precisely. She had mentioned, in conversation, that she would be leaving London, and he had mentioned that he had reason to be in that part of the city on Thursday morning. They were both too precise to call it an accident. He fell into step beside the carriage as it slowed. She put down the window. Lady Ashcombe, he said. His expression was the one she had come to know, the genuine attention, the real curiosity, the quality of being looked at by a person who was actually looking. Lord Vale. I heard you are going to the country. For a time. Good, he said simply. The country will suit you. The country has better air and fewer people who perform things. She almost smiled. That is precisely the recommendation. He walked beside the carriage for half a block. It was moving slowly, as London carriages do in busy morning streets. I may have reason to be in the same county, he said, at some point in the spring. That would be perfectly ordinary, she said. The county is not exclusive. No, he agreed. It is not. He stopped as the carriage reached the turn. He looked at her through the window with the expression of a man who has a great deal more to say and is choosing, correctly, to say it at a different time. Take care of yourself, Lady Ashcombe, he said. I always have, she replied. The carriage turned. She looked forward. The letter arrived at Ashcombe House 2 hours before her carriage reached the county road, forwarded from the house to the first posting stop by Mrs. Hartley, who had received it that morning and recognised her mistress's name on the envelope. No return address, no seal she recognised. She opened it. Inside, a single card, cream paper, fine quality. The handwriting was precise and entirely unfamiliar, neither masculine nor feminine, belonging to no one she could identify. One sentence. She read it. She read it again. She sat with it for a long time, watching the London outskirts give way to the first green suggestions of countryside beyond the city's reach. The bare winter trees, the grey fields, the sky opening up as it does when you leave a city, becoming larger and more genuine than city skies are permitted to be. The card read, "You are not the only woman who knows how to play this game." She looked at it. She looked at the countryside. She looked at the card again. And Vivian Ashcombe, who had been underestimated, who had been deceived, who had built the most elegant and invisible revenge in the history of a social world that prided itself on visibility, felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not fear, not triumph. Something between them. The specific sensation of a person who has completed one thing and discovered, at the moment of completion, that something larger was always waiting on the other side of it. Someone had been watching. Someone who understood what she had done and how she had done it. Someone who had been watching from a position sophisticated enough to see the invisible architecture of everything she had constructed, and who had reached out not to expose her, not to threaten her, but to name her. You are not the only one. She considered the implications of this for some time. Then she placed the card in her travelling case, in the interior pocket where she kept the things that mattered. She looked at the countryside. She thought about quiet, about space, about the country air Edmund had recommended, about Mr. Fenwick and the estate documents, and the practical shape of the life she was going to build in the place where the city's noise couldn't reach. She thought about spring, about Edmund saying, "I may have reason to be in the same county," with the particular careful hope of a man planting something he intends to return to. She thought about the card in her travelling case, and the handwriting that belonged to no one, and the woman, she was certain it was a woman, who had watched everything and said nothing until the moment it was finished. And she thought, how interesting. How very, very interesting. She settled back against the carriage seat. Outside, England moved past in its winter quiet, bare and clean and full of the particular possibility of things that have not yet grown. She was not afraid of the card. She was not afraid of the unknown woman who had sent it. She was, she recognized with some surprise, curious. And curiosity, as she had learned over 6 years of watching from the shadows, was always the beginning of something. She closed her eyes. She let the carriage carry her forward. She was not finished. She was simply finished with this. And whatever came next, whatever game was being played by whoever had been watching, would find her ready. She was always ready. She was Vivian Ashcombe, and she had never, not once, been what anyone expected her to be. Final character, quotes of the series. You mistook my silence for innocence. You watched me manage your house, your dinners, your reputation, your entire social existence. And you saw a quiet woman being obedient. You never once considered that I was paying attention, that I was learning you, that every piece of information you gave me, every careless moment, every late carriage and hidden letter and unfamiliar perfume, you gave me the materials. I simply built something with them you didn't expect. Vivian Ashcombe to Castro. The coldest revenge requires the warmest smile. She smiled at every dinner. She smiled when she invited Agatha into the house. She smiled when she poured the tea. She was smiling, I now understand, because she had already won, and winners can afford to be gracious. Abigail Whitmore, Private Correspondence. I lost my political standing, my financial security, my mistress, and my wife's respect, all in the same season. What I did not lose, and what I will spend a considerable time examining, is my wife herself. She is still alive. She is in the country. She has taken nothing that was not hers. She has left everything that was mine, intact, unharmed, waiting. Oh, even now, even in leaving, she is more generous than I deserved. I did not know her. I intend to spend whatever she allows me trying to correct that. Lord Hector Castro Ashcombe, Private Journal. She did what the rest of us only imagine. She took the thing that was done to her, the dismissal, the invisibility, the assumption of her softness, and she made it her weapon, not by becoming hard, by becoming herself, completely, in a world that had decided she was nothing. The world, as it turns out, was catastrophically wrong. Lord Edmund Vale, Private Journal. They called her quiet. They meant it as a diminishment. They had no idea, none of them had any idea, that quiet was the language she chose because it was the most powerful one available to her. She spoke it fluently. She spoke it brilliantly. She spoke it until the room had no choice but to listen. Lady Beatrice Holloway, unknowingly describing what she had been a part of. I thought I was winning. I thought the East Wing room and the dinner table proximity and the jewellery and the position were winning. I thought his attention was winning. I did not understand. I genuinely, completely did not understand. That I had walked into a house whose mistress had decided to let me in, and that everything I believed I was taking, she had chosen to give me. She was never losing. There was never a moment when she was losing. The loss was always going to be mine. I just couldn't see the architecture of it until I was already inside. Agatha Morell. You are not the only woman who knows how to play this game. Unknown, final card. She arrived at the carriage, a woman leaving. She arrived at the country, a woman beginning. The letter in her travelling case. The countryside opening ahead. Edmund in the spring. The unknown woman watching from wherever unknown women watch from. Vivian Ashcombe lost a marriage. She kept everything else, including herself, especially herself. If you made it to the end, if you watched Vivian move through 4 episodes without once raising her voice, without once losing her composure, without once giving her enemies the satisfaction of visible anger, then you already understand what this series was really about. It was never about revenge. It was about a woman reclaiming the version of herself that a careless man had decided wasn't worth seeing. The revenge was just the method. The moment that will stay with you longest, tell us in the comments. Was it the fireplace? When she burned the document and said, "Let us begin." The tea scene. When she caught Agatha in her room and offered her a cup, the ballroom entrance in silver, "You mistook my silence for innocence." The final card in the carriage. And the question that matters most right now, that last card. You are not the only woman who knows how to play this game. Who sent it? What do they want? What does Season 2 look like? Tell us your theory in the comments. If you want Season 2, if you need to know who was watching and what they want, and what Vivian does with the spring and Edmund and the unknown woman's invitation. Comment Season 2. The quietest revenge is the one you never see coming. You never saw it coming. Neither did they. Like, subscribe, and tell us, where in the world did you watch this from? We want to know how far Vivian's story travelled. Something tells us it went everywhere. The quietest revenge. Series 1. Complete.